So the last technique that we're gonna look at is probably gonna be one of your students' favorites. It's a really fun word for them to say, and it's a really cool process, and that is the sgraffito process. So there's two ways that I'm gonna show you how to do that. So what the sgraffito process is it's putting down a layer of oil pastel and putting another layer over top of it so that you can then take away and carve into to create detail and a really cool depth within a piece. So here are two examples of a sgraffito technique. This sgraffito technique is used with oil pastel over oil pastel, which I'll show you how to do. This sgraffito technique is created by having a coat of oil pastel first, then having an acrylic paint painted over top of it. And then that detail in there is added in there by chipping away or scratching into that acrylic paint to reveal what's underneath. It kind of, if you think about scratch art, it's a similar process to that, but your students don't have to buy those pieces, they can make their own. So we're gonna look at this sgraffito technique first by using oil pastel over oil pastel. So when you do this, you want to have colors that are contrasting. And for sometimes this can be hard for your students to understand. So you might think about, okay, if you're using, let's use warm colors to start with. So I'm going to use a yellow. And notice here that I'm already just pressing really, really hard, doing some heavy blending with this. If you don't do this, if you're not pressing hard together, this process is not going to work as well. You can do this with a solid color. It is a little bit more visually interesting if you mix and blend colors together. You can even create a pattern with it. Really, you could create anything. So now that I have this, I am going to take a blue and a green, and I'm going to press over top of this in a similar way. And you can see, and the colors obviously will blend together a little bit, but for the most part, you can see that it's really covering over. So I had pink underneath there, it's really covering over that. So now as I mix this green, yes, it mixed with that yellow a little bit, but for the most part, it covers over top of it. So now, to complete the sgraffito technique, you're going to need a toothpick. A wooden stylus. I like to use these plastic carving tools. And what you're going to do is you are just going to scrape away that top surface. And as you do that, it will reveal what is underneath. I like to use a tool like this that's a little bit wider rather than a toothpick, because the toothpick lines can be so small that it can be hard to see what your students are creating. So it's a really easy way to create some visual interest with it. It's a fun process because it just kind of amazes your students. It seems like it's a bit magical, but it's a really cool process that is great for all of your students. So when you do that sgraffito technique, we have created a pattern inspiration resource for you, and you're probably gonna end up using this all of the time, but this is a really great tool to use when you're creating the sgraffito, if you're doing the sgraffito technique. So your students could refer to this and they might say, oh, I really like this design. I'm gonna try that with my sgraffito pattern or design that I'm doing. So make sure to download this. Your students are gonna love it. You'll use it all of the time in your classroom. So we looked at sgraffito with the oil pastel over oil pastel. Now we're gonna take a look at what happens when you have a oil pastel with the acrylic paint over top of it. So I've already painted this layer here. If we take a look at this, this is just kind of a tester example. This here this is all the same color underneath here, where it's this pink, blue, and purple. Then over here, I did the oil pastel over oil pastel with some orange, I think just a solid orange. And as you scrape away, that color contrast isn't a lot, so it's kind of hard to see. From here, I created a black layer of paint, and then I carved away at this. So your students could use that resource to create their own patterns, or you might even consider them using a stencil design to have kind of more of an orderly process to that. So before I go in and do that, you don't want this acrylic paint coat to be too thick. But as you go in, it's really gonna reveal over top. So I'm gonna use this so I can have a little bit of a bigger space to show you. So now you can see that that design is coming through, and it just creates a really cool added element of design to your pieces. So you might be thinking, well, how would I actually use sgraffito in an actual project? And the answer is you can really use it anyway, but one of the best ways might be to fill it in with the background. So I have this image of just this still life drawing that students might be working on. You might consider going in and filling in the background with a different, just a solid pattern or a gradient of colors mixing together. Then you could go ahead and use that sgraffito technique to create a very visually interesting background. If I were to plop that in behind, it's going to really make those oranges on top of there really stand out, and it's just going to create an added element of depth to your pieces in a visually interesting way.